computer.
All right, so you hear me now, right?
Right,
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. I just hung up on the other side.
Perfect. Okay. So you can see the screen, right?
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay. So yeah. So we started out by talking about the typical sales process. You know, that the typical salesperson opens with something canned or corny, asks a few quick questions, that what they really want to do is present, which is also known as a product dump, and then, of course, you have to close. And I showed you the screen where it shows you those 4 steps in about the size relative to how much time typically people devote to that. So they devote very little time to the opening or the information gathering, the majority of their time to their presentation because they want to tell everything about everything, and each of these little stars are points about your company, your product, your service, and all the things that make us great. And then, of course, the close has to be long because when you do a product dump, the prospect is learning all kinds of things that they probably don't need to know, but included in the things that you're sharing with them are the reasons that they will buy. And because they've got those reasons, but you haven't figured them out because you haven't asked the right questions, that's why you need to be a strong closer. And so that's when we got into the 6-step process for conversational selling skills, which makes it a little easier to sell. In fact, I'd say a lot easier to sell by having simply a conversation with prospects that leads them to choose to do business with you. And we went into exactly what you just said, how to open a meeting by using that. I'm just curious before we get started, how'd you get to be the VP of sales in my instance, or you know, it could be a buyer, you know, whoever you're selling to, the human resources director, you know, whoever they actually are, and then letting them speak so that they get the gift of being listened to, and you're doing the listening. And this is what starts to build some real rapport. We talked about gaining the right to ask questions because that's what we really want to do. And I talked, I believe, about the transition from how do you go from the, and I'm just curious before we get started, how'd you get to be the president of the company? How do you go into asking questions? And we talked about gaining the right by answering a question of theirs. And the question that we're going to answer is, tell me about your company. Now, sometimes they will say that, but if you remember correctly, I believe that we'll need to help them with that because we want to make the transition from the opening and rapport building seamless. And so we'll say at the end of their little talk about who they are and what they do, would it help if I go first? Or would it help if I tell you a little bit about myself or my company? Would it help if I tell you a little bit about Verizon Wireless? Anything like that, which in essence is them asking, yeah, tell me about you, because that, of course, is the reason you're there. And that's when you're going to go into your brief commercial where you're going to explain to people what do we sell and why do people do business with us, what makes us different or better than the competition. And I happen to love this one, and some people don't. But even though we're not always the least expensive option, people choose us because. And from those, you can build your brief commercial. The keys being it has to be very quick. It has to get right to the point. It has to be what I call an aha moment. And it has to quickly and clearly explain to them, here's who we are and here's what we do, without giving away the ranch, because all we really want to do here is give them a quick taste for who we are and what we do so that we have the right to now start asking questions.
Why doesn't anyone else like that last line you have there?
I actually gave a program last week for they're a company that sells advertising, conferences, they have magazines, they do market research, stuff like that. And when I brought this up, somebody raised their hand and said, I would never say that in a million years. And I asked the same question you did because I'm full of questions. You know, why would you not? And she said, well, why would I want to bring up in the prospect's mind that we're not the least expensive? And I actually believe I used your company as an example. I said, well, look, if it was all about being the least expensive, Verizon would be out of business because they're not. Vonage may be the cheapest, I don't know, you might, but why is it that Verizon dominates the market, or AT&T, companies like that, when there are much cheaper providers of cell service, landline service? So it's not really about the price. And she was like, well, I wouldn't want to put it in anybody's mind that we're not the cheapest. But my belief is this. I know that for me, Jeff, in every conversation that I have with my prospects, that at some point during the sales process, my prospect is going to say to me, whoa, that's a lot of money. And the reason for that is it's a lot of money. Now, it's not a lot of money for what they're getting, but it's not an insubstantial chunk of change. So one of the things I think about is when you get, I won't call that an objection, but resistance or a comment over and over and over. In other words, almost at some point my prospect's going to say that's a lot of money. So if you get something like that during your sales process over and over repeatedly, I suggest we're better off not waiting for them to bring it up, because we know they're going to bring it up at some point, and even if they don't bring it up, they're thinking it. So I think we're better off bringing it up first. So I do it right in my brief commercial, because I know they're not going to think I'm the least expensive. So I bring it up before they even have the chance to start thinking it, you know, and this is how I end my brief commercial. Even though we're not the least expensive option, people choose Jeff Goldberg and Associates because when we leave, their salespeople do get more appointments with decision makers. They do have a shorter sales cycle, and they just plain close more business more profitably. And the reason I bring that up is because I know they're going to be thinking it anyways. So I like to get things out on the table.
I can't agree with you more, actually. And I'm not saying this because of our reputation, but I am saying it because of my experience. I agree with you 1,000%. You're setting the framework, you're setting a foundation to build upon, that there are no surprises, and you're being a straight shooter. I really like it, actually. Thanks, yeah. And look, if it was all about being the cheapest, would anybody buy an iPhone? Absolutely not. No, no, or a Droid or any of the others. I mean, there are cheaper phones you can buy. No, but everybody wants these cool phones, even though they cost more, because of the value they bring to the table. Because that's really what selling is all about. Sure. Isn't that what you find? Oh, absolutely. I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, again, that puts their guard down. You're setting you're setting the foundation for honesty. I think so, and it's just that you're preparing them for what's there, so they're in the yes mode already. I love it. Yep, I believe that that's really what selling is all about: honesty and directness. You know, your prospect, I'm sure, just like my prospects, are busy people, and they don't have the time or the patience to put up with a lot of BS, which is what most salespeople give them. So when we're straight shooters, when we get right to the point, you know, now, of course, I'm not saying you walk in and just say, here's what we've got, because obviously I just told you that's not what we can do. But when it comes time to discuss what you have to bring to the table, I think it behooves us to get right to the point and say, here's what we've got, here's how it helps you. Do you want to buy? Because I actually think people respect that. In fact, I had a meeting with a gentleman who's trying to get me involved with his company. He sells an offering called the Gold Call. Gold, like G-O-L-D, like the color gold, or you know, the bar. And I met him because we both gave a speech to the National Speakers Association a couple of weeks ago. We kind of took a liking to each other, and we got together for a breakfast to discuss opportunities. And he actually had me listen to some recordings of the way he makes calls. And some of the calls on his website, the recordings you can access, and it's got people saying, and he's talking to, you know, TOs and people like that, and some of them on these recordings are saying, you know, I like what a straight shooter you are. It's very refreshing. In fact, in one of the calls, the guy actually says to him, I had a laugh, he goes, you know, what kind of sales training have you been through? And the guy answers, well, I've been through several. He goes, no, don't beat around the bush. Tell me what you've been through. And the guy answers, well, I took Sandler at one time. And the guy says, I thought so. I like the way you got right to the point. You know, I only give cold callers like you 10 seconds of my attention, and then I'm gone. So if that's the case, Jeff, then if people are only going to give us 10 seconds over the phone or a very short time when we're in person before they're going to cut us off, then we better get right to the point if we want to sell more rather than less. Doesn't that make sense to you? It does make sense. Yep, great. So once we get through that rapport building, once we get through the transitioning, which is using our brief commercial to get into the questioning phase, at that point we have to figure out what questions are we going to ask. And as far as I'm concerned, if you really do what I just said, at that point you have to figure out what questions you're going to ask, then actually you're already shot. You should be figuring out what questions you're going to ask before you go on an appointment. In fact, in my opinion, part of pre-meeting planning, there are several components, one of which is learn as much as you possibly can about the person or people that you're going to be meeting with. Learn as much as you can about the person or people you're going to be meeting with. Now, I use their website,
because you can often get information about certainly company officers on the website. I use Google because you can learn amazing things about people just by Googling them. You know, it's just incredible the wealth of information you can come up with on people much of the time just by Googling their name. So if I was going to be meeting with you and I Googled you, I might come up with let's see, Jeff DeBeach, he got a DWI last year in Westchester County. Well, I probably shouldn't bring that up in a sales conversation. Oh, but look, he's going to be speaking at a convention next month. Maybe I'll talk about that. So there's all kinds of things you can learn about the person or the people you're going to be meeting with so that you're prepared when you walk in. And, of course, I also want to be prepared by learning as much as I can about the company before I go in. I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to use their website. I'm going to use Google if I have access to any services like Hoover's or Dun & Bradstreet. I'm going to find out as much as I possibly can before I go in because I feel that's pre-meeting planning. Now, there's a point I want to make here and that's, I call it going in stupid. Going in stupid. Now, when I say going in stupid, I don't mean go in like an idiot, which I happen to be very good at, by the way. But what I really mean is you don't want to go in arrogant. And I used to be going in arrogant. Now, when I say going in arrogant, it would mean if I walked into your company and I said, hey, Jeff, let me tell you, I've done a lot of work in the telecommunications business. I know your challenges, and here's how I'll solve them for you. Even if that's true, even if I already know your challenges because I've done business with a lot of other telecommunications companies, even if I do know the challenges you face, and even if I do give you good solutions to those problems, you're going to resist me greatly when I come in like that, and here's why. Almost everyone thinks that their situation is special, that their situation is different. In fact, I often hear from my prospects, Jeff, I know you do a lot of work in the field of, if you can fill in a blank, let's say advertising. Jeff, I know you've trained a lot of companies in the world of advertising, but our company is different. Or Jeff, I know you've done a lot of work in the world of telecommunications, but our company is different. Just like every prospect for me is at some point going to say, wow, that's a lot of money, I promise you they're also going to tell me their company is different because that's what they all do. And the reason they do that, Jeff, is because they think their company is different. Is their company different? Not really. Now, there may be some specific challenges that they face based on their industry, maybe based on their company, but for the most part, sales challenges are all fairly similar. Almost all companies that sell B2B need to get themselves in front of prospects, whether it's over the phone or in person. They need to have a conversation with the prospect. They need to find out what the prospect needs, and then they have to give some kind of a presentation about why their product or service fulfills that need, and then they have to ask for the business. They have to be able to overcome objections or rebuttals. So there are similar things in all sales challenges. Now, is there a difference selling refrigerators from sales training from wireless phones? Of course there are differences, but they're pretty much all the same. Now, here's the thing. If I just come in and say, I know about your industry, I know about your company, you don't even have to say a word, let me tell you what's wrong with your company and here's how I'll fix it, even if all the information I say is absolutely true, they don't feel special. They don't feel listened to. So part of pre-meeting planning is figuring out as much as you can, finding out as much as you can about the company and the people, but not going in and being arrogant about it. In fact, you might say something like, look, I've done a lot of work in your case, perhaps the construction industry, helping construction companies, communicate better with their customers, their vendors, and their employees. But even though I've done a lot of work in your industry, I'd like to hear about your company, what your challenges are, and then we can put a program together that will solve some of your problems. So you're letting them know that you do have experience, but that you're willing to listen to them. So that's part of pre-meeting planning. Also, in terms of pre-meeting, I'm sorry?
You said I love it.
Good. The other thing in terms of pre-meeting planning, and that's where we got started on this when we saw the questions page, is I want to figure out, before I go on a sales call, what questions am I going to ask today? And the reason I want to figure that out in advance is not that I'm stupid and don't know the questions I'm going to ask, or not that I'm not nimble enough or flexible enough to be able to think up questions on the fly, but here's what I believe. Amateurs wing it and professionals plan. So what I want to do is I want to know all the questions that I could possibly ask before I even think about going on appointments, and then before I go on a specific appointment, I want to think about this particular question in my mind. What information do I need to get today in order to consider this sales call successful? I'm going to repeat that because I think it's so important. What information do I need to get today in order to consider this sales call successful? Because when I know what information I need to get in order to consider the sales call successful, I then know what questions I'm going to ask. And I want to think about the questions I'm going to ask before I go on the sales call. Not that I'm stupid, not that I don't know all the questions I could possibly ask, but simply because I want to be prepared. I want to have this sales call go as smoothly as it possibly can. And it's far more likely to go smoothly and more in my favor if I'm prepared with my questions rather than just thinking it up off the top of my head as we go along. Is that making any sense?
It certainly is.
Good. So I'm thinking about it in advance.
I may be wrong on this. I think the delay. Yeah, I think the delay is coming in on this thing. I'm going to call in. Hang on. We're getting a delay. Hold on one sec.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No sweat.
Sorry, Jeff.
No sweat. You're back, right?
I'm back.
Okay, good. So I'm going to be thinking in advance. I want to find out as much information as I can about the person or people. I want to find out as much information as I can about the company, and I want to think about what questions I need to ask today. The other thing I do pre-meeting, and this is typically done for me right outside of a prospect's building when I'm in my car or in a taxi or whatever, however I'm getting to see them, I actually visualize the meeting. Even if I haven't met the person before, I'll just put a face on them, a random face on them in my mind. But I actually close my eyes and I visualize the meeting. Have we talked about creative vision?
We did. We talked about visualizing goals in the end, something very detailed, but like a movie.
Good. So it's perfect. So it's the same thing when you visualize a sales call. You want to close your eyes, and I actually see myself walking into the other person's office. And again, even if it's a first meeting, I'm just making it up in my mind what it's going to look like. But what I see is myself with a big smile on my face, shaking their hand, them putting a smile on their face, them being very friendly, them asking me to sit down. We're laughing. We're having a lovely chat. I'm visualizing the whole thing going very conversationally, very easygoing, having a lot of fun, me asking some questions, them answering them asking me questions, me answering their questions. And at the end, I visualize them shaking my hand and signing a contract, whether it's a closing meeting or not, because what you visualize is more likely to come into reality than what you don't. So I'm doing my research on the person and the company. I'm thinking about what questions I need to ask that day, and I'm actually visualizing the meeting, all as part of the pre-meeting process. Now, in terms of questions, the questions that you have to ask the people that you're trying to sell to are the questions that are going to uncover what makes sense to your prospect. And the reason you want to uncover what makes sense to your prospect is because we do everything we do because it makes sense to do those things. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. We do everything we do because it makes sense to do those things. So in other words, you signed up for this 90 Days to Increase Sales program because it made sense to you to do that. At least it did before you signed up. I don't know if it still is, and I hope it does, but certainly before you signed up, you said, well, it makes sense. I'd like to improve my sales skills, or I'd like to be able to pass this information on to the people I'm working with, or whatever other reasons that you had, but you did it because it made sense. Did you eat breakfast this morning?
I certainly did.
Good. You must have been hungry, and it made sense to eat. I was not hungry this morning, and I did not eat breakfast. I'm standing in my office in my shorts and my tank top, maybe not a pretty picture for you, but because it didn't make sense to put on a suit to speak to somebody on the phone when they're not going to see me. You getting where I'm coming from? So we do everything we do because it makes sense, including buy stuff. And our prospects do too. They buy from us because it makes sense to buy. So the questions that we're going to ask our prospects in order to be better sellers are the questions which tell us what makes sense to them. That sounds confusing as it's coming out of my mouth. Is this making sense to you?
That's not, but everything else did so far. In other words, we're trying to find out, we're identifying what makes sense to them, we're honing in on that for the rest of the conversation.
Okay, so maybe if I go just a little further. In fact, I know how to clear this up. The way to clear this up is by telling you what makes sense to your prospects, because I happen to know what makes sense to your prospects. And here's the key. What makes sense to your prospects, just by the way, like what makes sense to my prospects, what makes sense to our prospects is whatever they're doing now regarding what we have to sell them. What makes sense to our prospects is whatever they're doing now regarding what we have to sell them. So in other words, I'm going to take this to my world for a minute because, of course, my world's the world I know best. So when I go into a company and talk with a president or a CEO or the vice president of sales about potentially doing some training, what I have to find out is what makes sense to them regarding sales training, or what makes sense to them regarding sales consulting. Because once I know what makes sense to them, I'll be able to figure out how to sell them. And what makes sense to them is whatever they're doing now. If what made sense to them, if what they were doing now did not make sense to them, they would be doing something different. So the kind of questions I'm going to ask of a prospect are the questions that uncover for me what makes sense to them, the prospect, regarding sales training. So questions like this. So let's say you're the vice president of sales at Verizon Wireless. I'm going to ask you questions like these. Hey, Jeff, when somebody first comes on board to your company, how do you train them? Do you have a training program in place, or do you just kind of wing it? You throw them a phone book and say, hit the phones. How about your average performers? Not the guys that are blowing away their quota month after month, not the guys that are failing, but the guys who, sometimes they hit their quota, sometimes they don't hit their quota, sometimes they come close to quota, sometimes they're a little further from quota, but I call them plotters. How about those guys? What do you do, if anything, to make them better? How about your top performers, the guys who are blowing away their quota? Do you do anything for them in regards to sales training, or do you just leave them alone? Have you ever used an outside consultant like me? Who did you use? What did you like about them? What didn't you like about them? What would you have changed? Why didn't you call them? Do you see where I'm going with this? The questions I'm asking are the questions about what they've done before regarding what I have to sell them, because what they've done before is what made sense to them. Is this becoming clearer now, Jeff?
It is. It's also what they've done before that's not working for them in a way, right?
I'm sorry, say that again. It was a little unclear.
It could also be considered that what they've done before is not necessarily working for them, or it's working, but it's not working to the ideal capacity that they want it to, right?
It may or may not. And by the way, it may be, when I ask them what makes sense to them, which I wouldn't do in those words, it may be that they're doing nothing. And if they're doing nothing, that's what makes sense to them. So if I say, well, what are you doing now to train your salespeople? And you said, we're not doing anything, then in my mind, I know that now what made sense is doing nothing regarding sales training. Or yes, you used another trainer and it didn't work out. Well, it made sense when you first hired the trainer, but it doesn't make sense anymore.
That's a better way.
And the question, I'm sorry?
I said I get it. That's a perfect way.
Yeah, so the questions that we want to ask are based in the past, the present, and the future. So what have you done in the past, what are you doing now, and what do you want to accomplish in the future regarding what I have to sell you? So in terms of your world, which of course you know better than I do, but as far as I can tell, the purpose of telecommunications is to connect people with their customers, their employees, and their vendors. Do you see what you do differently? Do you have some different idea of what you sell does for your prospects?
No. I mean, again, it can help them connect, but there are other things that help them run more efficiently. You know the spiel about that.
Well, run more efficiently by doing what?
Well, in some instances now, we're running off away from voice these days with what we call machine-to-machine solutions. So it could be monitoring where the trucks are going. Let's say a fleet of cement mixers. It could be tracking assets, tools, expensive copper wire, putting detectors that work wirelessly that stream data to let us know where they are, wireless security cameras, routers to be put in a job site trailer to get them up and running on the internet at high speed instantly instead of waiting 6 to 8 weeks for the DSL guys to come in.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I still say that connects you with your employees, your vendors, and your customers.
I agree.
At the very bottom line. So the questions that you would have to ask of a prospect, or that the people at your company would have to ask, are the questions which find out, well, how do you do those things now? How do you monitor where your trucks are now? How do you connect with your employees instantly when you need them? How do your customers get in touch with you? You know, all those questions. And the main questions, if you look at your screen, the main questions that you want to cover are, what do you do? Who do you do it with? Where do you do it? When do you do it? How do you do it? And why do you do it that way? And of course, what are you trying to accomplish? It's kind of like being a newspaper reporter or a magazine reporter. What you're looking to get at are the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions that explain to you what makes sense to them. Now, you may not ask those questions. You may not say, what do you do and who do you do it with? But if you heard the questions that I was asking before with regards to sales training, those were the same questions, just in different words, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So the question becomes then, since we need to cover these questions, how will we actually ask them? And as I said before, I want you to be prepared with the questions. Now, did we cover stream of consciousness brainstorming?
Yes, that's where you talked about writing down anything that comes to mind, as ridiculous as it is, and the more ridiculous you write, the more clear it's going to be when it comes down in the end, and you write all those items down. Is that what we discussed?
That's exactly right, and I appreciate the fact that you actually listen. So, yeah, to me, one of the best things a sales group could possibly do, and I love doing this in a sales meeting, is using stream of consciousness brainstorming session to come up with what questions we should be asking. See, too many people are winging it. I know for me, before I actually gave thought to this, my sales meetings used to look kind of like this. So I'd go in, I'd establish some rapport, I'd do my brief commercial, I'd ask a question. And while the other person, the prospect, is answering my question, inside my head, I'm feverishly thinking, okay, what am I going to say next? Or what am I going to ask next? While they're talking and I'm supposed to be listening, instead I'm thinking about what piece of brilliance needs to come out of my mouth next, whether it's a question or a statement. But when you have your questions prepared in advance, you don't have to be thinking about that, and you can be very present in the moment. You can actually be having a conversation with your prospect rather than a monologue or asking questions and not really listening, which amounts to a monologue too.
Got it.
So I suggest that you or anybody who you're working with on your team needs to come up with the questions in advance. And here's the way I like to frame it when you do stream of consciousness brainstorming regarding what questions would we ask. So again, you're going to set aside a certain amount of time. You're going to go to a place that's fairly quiet. You're going to get rid of your cell phone or your computer. You just want to be as quiet as you can. You want to clear your mind for a minute or two, and then you want to ask this question. If I had unlimited time and I knew that my prospect was going to answer every question I asked honestly, what questions would I ask today? I'm sorry, not today. What questions would I ask, period? Because what we want is the list of every question we could possibly ask. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to ask each of those questions on every sales call, but it does mean you will have a laundry list of questions that you could ask at any time when appropriate. So again,
can you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yes, I will. If I knew, if I knew my prospect would give me an unlimited amount of time, and I knew that my prospect would answer every question completely honestly, what questions would I ask them?
Got it. Thank you.
Now, you and I both know that we don't have unlimited amounts of time. We can't spend 8 hours with a prospect, and we know that sometimes they don't answer honestly for various reasons. But that's not our questions would we ask if they would give us all the time in the world, and if they would answer everything with complete candor, what would we ask then? Now, once you have that laundry list of questions that you could possibly ask, and as far as I'm concerned, anything, I mean, this should be pages and pages of questions that you could possibly come up with. Now, when you're thinking in a pre-meeting planning session about what questions do I need to get answered today in order to consider this sales call successful, now all you have to do is go through your list and figure out, oh, I need question 6, question 22, question 36, whatever they are. So now you're prepared, and you can actually go in knowing in advance what questions you're going to be covering that day, and you can be more present in the moment to have a real conversation with your prospect because you've already thought about how the conversation is going to go. You're going to guide it around to those particular questions so that you walk away with the answers that you need to eventually put together a proposal for them. When you have the information about what they do and who they do it with, where they do it, when they do it, how they do it, and why they do it that way, your presentation is going to become very simple because you've now discovered what makes sense to them. It's whatever they're doing now. And when you know that, your presentation becomes, Jeff, here's what you're doing now, and here's how Verizon Wireless can help you do it better. Because if people buy because it makes sense, and they do, if people buy because it makes sense, then when you show them a better way, it should make better sense and they should buy. Now that does not mean that everybody's going to buy from you, but far more people buy when you can show them a better way than what they're doing now. They're not going to buy something that's the same unless it's for less money, which means it's not the same.
Right.
What they're going to do is buy something that helps them do what they do better. So why do people buy training from me? Because I help them sell better. Because I help them manage salespeople better. Because I help them get more appointments with decision makers better than they're doing it now. Because I help them have a shorter sales cycle, which equals better. Because I help them close more business, which is better. So that's what your whole presentation is going to be about. But you cannot give a presentation like that unless you know what they're doing now. So as opposed to the salesperson that walks in and says, let me show you why Verizon Wireless is the company for you. Better coverage, better this, better the other thing. Well, you're not taking into account what they're doing now. But when you know they have AT&T or any of the other providers, and you know why they went with AT&T, and who made that decision, and when did you make that decision, and what do you like about AT&T, and what don't you like about AT&T, and all those other things that you could ask about AT&T, and I'm betting you, if you did, you already know the questions to ask about AT&T because you already know their strong points and their weak points, and you can lead the conversation in the right way. Well, then you can find out doing what they're doing so that when it's time to present, your presentation should make better sense to them. Is this tracking for you now, Jeff?
Yep, absolutely.
Beautiful. So it's crucial because I believe that this is the step that is most important in the sales process. It's crucial that you're really good at asking questions and asking them in a conversational way. And if you remember what we talked about last time, the way to make it conversational is to use softeners, to be prepared so that you're not just pitching, and to use softeners. Hey, out of curiosity, how do you track your trucks now? How do you keep track of your inventory? I'm just curious. What blah blah blah. Does that sound good?
Yep. Cool.
Okay. So my suggestion for you is you want to come up with that laundry list of questions. Now, here's the other part of information gathering. If you're going to ask questions, you have to be a good listener. Otherwise, your questions are useless. So previously, before I developed this way of questioning, previously when I would go in and ask a question and wasn't really listening to the answers because I was thinking about the next thing I was going to say or the next question I was going to ask, it's almost useless to have asked the questions. Because my belief is this: if you ask the right questions and listen carefully to the answers, your prospect will tell you everything you need to know in order to sell them. But if you ask the right questions and don't listen to the answers, you might as well not have asked in the first place. You might as well just go in and pitch and hope for the best. So let's talk a little bit about listening skills. To me, the number one skill in selling is questioning, and the second skill is listening, and the third one is storytelling. You've got to be good at all three of them. And I believe there are two types of listening. There's active listening, and there's passive listening. Passive listening is what most of us do most of the time. Passive listening is typically the way divorced husbands listen to their ex-wives. In fact, the best way I can describe passive listening is, I don't know if I ever told you my ex-wife's name. Her name is Jackie. She's a wonderful partner in raising our children and a great mom and all that. But I love to use this example because it makes it ring true for me at least.
So Jeff, hold on. My divorce lawyer is calling me. Give me 1 second. Hang on 1 second. Thanks so much. Sorry about that, Jeff. That's probably the greatest coincidence in the history of mankind.
And I want you to know, I thought you were joking.
No, I was serious tonight. I'm sorry. I made that really quick. I would never do that, but it happened to have been him.
Oh, that is too funny.
Yeah, no, that is remarkable, and you're just about to give the example.
That is great. I don't know if I ever shared with you, but my divorce attorney is brilliant, and he happens to be one of my best friends since high school. If you ever want to talk to him for any reason because you're unhappy with your guy, just let me know and I'll hook you up with him.
Oh, no, I love this guy. You want to laugh? I talk about active listening. I really worked very hard listening to the demands that my ex-wife wanted, and I got away with murder, pitching something back. It was very well done. Even he said to me, he's like, Jesus Christ. We got a good deal. Finally, one of the husbands got a good deal.
Well, I don't want to take up your time with my story, but one of these days I'll share you what my brilliant attorney actually came up with that moved my divorce forward, because it was just stuck. Anyways, so the best example I have for passive listening is when I was married to Jackie. Jackie, every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, or sometime between 9 and 10 o'clock, used to come to me with something incredibly urgent that we needed to talk about right then and there. And it was always something like, would you believe that Susie wore brown shoes with a black dress to work today? Like I know who Susie is or care. Like I know that brown shoes go with a black dress or don't. And to this day I don't know. But every Wednesday night between 9 and 10 p.m., Jackie would come to me with something like that. You know, it wasn't the same question every time, but it was something as silly as that every single time. Now, do you have any idea why she would come to me between 9 and 10 on a Wednesday night? Why that time in particular?
I can't fathom.
Okay. It was because that was when my favorite TV show was on, The West Wing. And Jackie knew that I loved The West Wing, and she figured that that was the best time to have some inane conversation about something silly like shoes and a dress or whatever she had to talk about that time. Now, I don't know if you ever watched the show The West Wing. Did you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so it was a brilliant show.
Darren Sorkin, you can't pass up on him.
Are you watching the new show that he's got on now?
I got into the first episode, shocked me as to how good it was, and then I caught the second one, and I'm on the road so much. Do I get HBO? Do I not? I now have to get them off the internet, so I have a couple of them now. I got to catch up on my laptop, but yeah, I like the show. Jeff,
yeah, it's getting better and better each time. It's not The West Wing, but it's really good. Anyways, you know, The West Wing was very smart, very quick-moving. I believe that they either recorded it low or they all mumbled on purpose. You know, you really had to pay attention, otherwise you were lost. So when I was watching The West Wing and asked me something silly, in my opinion, you know, I'd be looking at her and going, oh, yeah, brown shoes, black dress, and I'd be looking back at the TV and going, what did I just miss? And then look back at her and going, I'm sorry, what did you say, honey? And then I'd be looking back at the TV because I didn't want to miss the show. And that's passive listening. It's listening that doesn't work very well. In fact, my thought when she would be asking me one of these questions was always the same. It was always, would God please strike one of us dead? And I don't care which one it is, but if it's me, I hope West Wing's on up in heaven. So that's passive listening. It doesn't work well in a marriage, and it certainly doesn't work well when you're trying to sell somebody something. Active listening is very different. Active listening is like, you've flown on an airplane more than once or twice, yes?
Absolutely.
Good. So you know what they do when they close the doors on an airplane, right? They come out and they teach you how to put on a seatbelt each and every time like you've never done it before in your life. And they show you where the emergency exits are, and they point to the floor, and they say, you know, in case of an emergency, lights are going to light up, and in case of a loss of cabin pressure, the air thing is going to pop down, and even though it doesn't inflate, don't worry, the air is flowing through it, and if you're traveling with a child, put on your air first and their second. You know, I don't know about you, but I've traveled quite a number of times, and I've heard this speech more times than I can count. Now, if you're anything like me, Jeff, you don't listen to that speech anymore. I could give that speech. I don't listen to it for sure. The only airline that I listen to that talk on is JetBlue, because sometimes they're funny. You know, they get to be comedians sometimes. But other than that, I don't listen when they're giving the emergency instructions because I already know what they're going to say. In fact, when they close the doors on an airplane, I'm doing two things. One, I'm typing really fast because I know that any second now they're going to come and tell me that I have to put away my laptop or my iPad. The second thing I'm doing, yeah, exactly. The second thing I'm doing is I'm praying that when they start pulling the plane away from the jetway, that they actually do get up into the air as quickly as they possibly can because they don't bring the drink cart down the aisle until we get up in the air. So that's what I'm doing when they close the doors. I'm sure not listening to the emergency instructions. Now, imagine, however, where you and I are flying on a joint sales call from New York to London, and we take off from JFK. And about 3 hours into the flight, we're about halfway there, the pilot comes on with the piloty voice that they all seem to have. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're flying at 550 miles an hour towards London. However, we're experiencing a little difficulty. Both wings just fell off. We'll now be plummeting into the ocean at 550 miles an hour, but first, your flight attendants will come out and review the safety procedures. When the flight attendants come out and review the safety procedures before we crash into the ocean, do you think than you did when they first closed the doors, Jeff?
Oh, absolutely not. I'll be right on the horn with them.
Yeah, I'm with you. But most people, I think, will be listening a little bit differently than they did when they first closed the doors. That's what I call active listening. Listening like your life depends on it. Now, on a sales call, does your life depend on you listening? No, absolutely not. But your livelihood does. Your commission check does. Your continued employment, because you're closing business, does depend on you actively listening. So I think it's crucial that a person actively listens if they're going to be a better seller. Now, there are a couple of things that you can do in order to be a more effective listener. The first thing you can do is actually focus in the moment. Effective listeners do several things. First of all, they think and they mentally summarize what the other person is saying. They weigh the evidence of what they're hearing against what they already know. Effective listeners also listen carefully to the tone of voice of the person that's talking. Because, and when we get to the part about prospecting skills, which you've kind of been through already, I'll share with you. Actually, I can share it with you right now. There was a study done several years back that showed how people understand communication. And it's based on, well, in face-to-face communication, like in a face-to-face sales situation, there are three things that influence how a person understands what you're saying. The first thing is the words you use. The second thing is your tone of voice. And the third one is your body language. So when I was there with you guys, doing the sales training seminar in Manhattan, the way you guys were understanding the words that were coming out of my mouth were based on the words I was saying, the tone of voice I was using when I was saying them, and my body language. Now, of course, you lose body language over the phone, but let's just talk about face-to-face selling for a second. That what they found was that when you're face-to-face with somebody, the way they understand you is based on 55% of what they understand you is based on your body language. 55%. 38% is based on your tone of voice, and only 7% is based on the actual words that you're using. Now, if you look at those numbers, you would think that your words are not important. That's not true, of course. Of course, your words are very important, but it's not the most important thing when you're selling face-to-face. The most important thing is actually your body language. And when they talk about body language in face-to-face communication, you're talking about a lot of different things, from the way you walk in the door to the way you hold your body, to the way you're dressed, the way you smell, to what you look like. Everything counts. But 55% of how a person understands what you're saying is based on your body language. Then 38% is, so in other words, if I talked like this to you in a monotone the entire time, you would understand me very differently than if I talk like I do, which is with inflection and enthusiasm. Right. And only 7% is based on the words. Over the phone, you lose the body language. So you'd have to, if you were putting these into a column, you would put a 0 through the body language column. And in phone communications, 84% of how somebody understands you is based on your tone of voice, and only 16% is based on your words. So your tone of voice is crucial. So if you're going to be an effective listener, you're actually listening to the person's, not just their words, but also their tone of voice, how they're saying what they're saying. An effective listener also fights distractions. It's easy to get distracted. There's a million things that could be distracting you when you're on a sales call. But an effective listener really fights distractions and actually concentrates and gives a lot of focus to what they're doing. It's a very Zen-like moment. If you've ever studied Zen Buddhism, it's all about being in the moment, be here now, being very present. So it actually takes focus and concentration to be a good listener. It's not a skill that most people have. An effective listener also knows how to organize and take notes in a way that works for them. See, every time you write notes when you're listening to somebody who's speaking, you can't be listening to what they're saying next. So given that we're doing this as a webinar and we're on the phone, I have no idea when you're taking notes, so I just keep going. However, if we were in person, I'd actually be watching you take notes, and I would slow down or actually stop. And you do a great job sometimes of asking me to repeat myself or waiting for a moment so that you can take notes. But an effective listener knows how to take notes in a way, in kind of a shorthand, that works for them, so that afterwards you'll be able to review your notes, and even though somebody else may look at them and not understand what you're talking about, an effective listener does know how to read their own notes. An effective listener also judges the content of what the person is saying and skips over any delivery errors. So there's lots of things that could be delivery errors when somebody's speaking to you. A lisp, a sibilant S, a stutter, anything like that. Those are all what I call delivery errors. It makes it tougher to concentrate. And what an effective listener does is they tune out that other stuff. Maybe not completely, but they don't pay attention to it. What they're listening for is what's the person saying, not do they have a sibilant S. Okay? And they also listen for central ideas, as opposed to, and not just everything that they're saying.
Hang on one second. Can I stop you?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to what they're listening to, because I'm missing second bullet point. They think and summarize when they're listening. They technically skip over their errors. They judge the content, and central ideas is what you just said to me. I missed one.
They listen to tone of voice.
That was it, tone, okay.
And they fight distractions.
That's exactly what it is. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, prospects often don't answer your question correctly because they've never heard the question before. So you may have heard this phrase, the buyer is a liar. You ever hear that one?
No,
you never heard that? Well, it's a famous phrase in sales, the buyer is a liar. I actually don't believe that. I don't believe the buyer that is usually a liar, but I believe that they often don't answer your questions correctly because they've never heard the question before. And in fact, if you ask the same question during your sales call, the same question worded differently and at a different time during the sales process, you're more likely to help them get to the truth. In other words, you know the game telephone that little kids play?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, so I whisper something to you, you whisper it to the next person, it goes around a circle, and when it gets back to me, it's usually a completely different statement or a completely different question. Well, that's kind of how it is with questioning and customers. In other words, let's say there were 5 of us, and we all walked in to see the same prospect, one right after the other, and we all ask exactly the same question. Well, if I go in first and you go in last, I'm betting you'll get a better answer than I will, because as the prospect answers the question over and over, they get better at answering it. They start thinking in different ways, and they just get better at their answer. So one of the things we want to do when we're questioning is we want to ask what I call higher level questions, or they're also known as second, third, and fourth level questions. So every question you ask, you want to try and make sure you ask the same question at a different time during your sales call in different words. Is that tracking for you, Jeff?
It is, but I'm trying to think of an example. I understand completely what you're saying. I just want to figure out an example. And again, the benefit on this is that it makes it, I'm a little confused, it makes it easier for them to understand what we're doing and how we can align ourselves with them and help them, or sell them, essentially.
Exactly. It helps them get closer to the truth for them about what you're asking them. So, so Jeff, how do you train your people now? Well, you might answer that. And then later on, I might ask, so what kind of training programs do you have in place for your people? Well, it's the same question, really. How do you train your people now? And what kind of training programs do you have in place? But I've used different words. So it doesn't sound like the same question, but I'm making you think about the same thing. It should not be obvious to you because, well, Jeff, that's the same question you asked me before. But when you, I mean, so you certainly wouldn't ask the same question, even with different words, twice, you know, one right after the other. But you do want to be prepared to ask your questions in several different ways because it helps your prospect get closer to the truth for them. Not that they're trying to deceive you most of the time, not that they're trying to lie to you, it's just you're helping them get closer to the answer that you need, which is the most honest answer. Again, not that they're being deceptive, just that sometimes they've never heard the question before because they've never been asked it. Is that making sense now?
It is.
Good, okay. So we want to make sure that we help them answer our questions correctly by asking the same question in several ways. Now, obviously, the question we really want to ask is, look, what will you buy from me, and what's it going to take to get you to do so? Except we can't be that direct. So we have to be really good about asking questions by knowing all the possible questions we could ask and being able to ask them in various ways, and then by being an active listener. Now, here are some tips for improving listening skills. The first one is maintain eye contact. One of the ways you show people that you're listening and one of the ways you stay focused when you're listening is by looking somebody in the eye. Now, of course, you have to blink occasionally, otherwise you look like a stalker. You don't want to give them the stalker stare, but you do want to look people in the eye. The next thing you want to do to improve your listening skills is listen with your face. And by that I mean there's an expression that most of us put on our face when we're listening. It's usually a very intent look, you know, like you're really paying attention. In fact, when you watch your kids, you know, when you ask them a question, I'm going to take that back. Let's forget about your kids, although your kids are probably like my kids. When my kids are watching TV, so let's say they're watching SpongeBob, which they love and I love, and I go in like I'm making breakfast, and they're watching SpongeBob, and I go in and say, what do you guys want for breakfast? Well, the answer I usually get is dead silence, because they hear SpongeBob, not Jeff or Daddy.
Right.
But when I ask them a question like, hey, what would you like for your birthday? That's if they're not watching SpongeBob, then the look that they get on their face is very intent. You can see that they're listening carefully to what I'm saying. Or if I say, what would you like for your birthday? Would you like a pony? Or would you like a bicycle? Or would you like a chemistry set? They get a look on their face like they're really listening carefully because what they're hearing is important to them. What would you like for your birthday is a very important question to them. And you can see on their face that they're really paying attention. Same thing with us. There's a look that each of us gets when we're listening intently, and it shows people that we're listening. It actually shows them that we are paying attention to what they're saying, and I want the person that I'm listening to believe that I'm listening to them actively because it sets me apart from most salespeople. One of the biggest complaints from most prospects about salespeople is they just don't listen. They're more intent on pitching me on what they've got than listening to what I need. So we want to use our face to listen. You want to avoid personal distractions like your phone or your watch. Now, I know that you're in the business of cellular communications, but one of the things I do when I go on a sales call is I leave my phone in the car. I used to just mute it and leave it in my inside jacket pocket, except here's the problem with that. When I mute my phone and it's inside my jacket pocket, if somebody calls me, it still buzzes. It vibrates, right. And I can hear it, and they can hear it. So if I'm hearing it and feeling it, of course, because it's vibrating against my chest, even though I'm a pretty good guy at being focused, there's still that little piece of my mind that's going, what the heck is that? Oh, it's my phone. Well, I'm not going to answer it. And while I'm saying those things quickly in my mind, I'm losing my track. The prospect, on the other hand, hears it vibrating in my pocket and is going, what's that? Oh, I guess it's Jeff's phone. Is he going to answer it? Should I tell him to answer it? It's distracting the both of us. So I either turn my phone completely off while I'm on a sales call, or I leave it in the car. Because I used to just mute it, and sometimes, of course, you forget. And now your phone rings in the middle of a sales call. I actually did that once at a speech. Now, I always turn off my phone before I give a speech, except one time I forgot to. It was still in my inside jacket pocket. I started the speech and my phone rings. So now I've got 150 people in a room listening to me talk about, it actually happened to be cold calling that day. I'm talking about cold calling to them. My phone rings, so now I've got them listening because, you know, I've got a microphone hooked up to my jacket pocket, which is right near the phone, so they can clearly hear my phone ringing through the loudspeakers. And it was either, what am I going to do? Ignore it, acknowledge it, or what do I do? Well, I actually took out my phone. I said, excuse me, everybody. I answered the phone, and it turned out to be my friend Dennis. I said, hey, you're not going to believe this, but I'm actually giving a speech right now in front of 150 people. Say hello to everybody. Say hello to Dennis, everybody. And 150 people went, hello, Dennis. And he was hysterical. I said, dude, I got to go right now. I should have turned my phone off. I apologize. I'll speak to you later. And, of course, it was a big laugh for everybody there, but that's not the way it works on a sales call. You know, an audience is different. Well, certainly you have an audience when you're on a sales call, but it's not the same as giving a speech. So my suggestion is avoid distractions. Don't be looking at your watch and worrying about the next sales call that you're going on. Don't have your phone ringing. Avoid as many distractions as you possibly can. By the way, I also mean not just personal distractions. I'm talking about external distractions also. Like if the room is too hot or the room is too cold or there's noise outside in the hall, you got to avoid all that stuff and just focus on the person.
Yeah, that's with me. I have to have the phone in there, so I go airplane mode now. But getting back to what you talked about with eye contact, I have to tell you something. One thing that drives me crazy, the eye contact is not maintained, whether by me or someone I'm going in on my side of the sales call with. They're looking at other things. They're being completely distracted. I can only imagine what the prospect thinks. One of the things that I read up on, I know you've heard of Selling to Veto. I remember an example in that where the author, Anthony, I forgot Anthony's last name, whatever. The
Anthony
author,
Cariello.
That was it. And he couldn't listen. Something was happening. It was an issue he had with hearing. Something may have been stuck. He went to the ear doctor. Whatever it was, something happened. And the prospect said to him later on down the line after they met, he said, I've never met anyone who's such a sharp listener. And he realized he kept looking at him like he could not hear. That's what made it seem like he gave that appearance that he was paying much more attention by looking like he could not hear. Isn't that weird?
Wow.
And I do that
now.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I actually do that.
It's highly complimentary to people when you look like you're listening to them. And, of course, we want our prospects to feel like they're special. We want them to feel like they're the most important person in the universe because at that moment they are. Now,
right.
Being a father, I'm sure you feel the same way I do. There's never a moment when anybody is more important to me than my 3 kids. But at the moment that I'm sitting in front of a prospect, they're a very close second because they're the ones who are about to help me feed my 3 kids. So I want to make them feel special, and one of the ways you make people feel special is by listening to them when they speak. So you want to be actively listening. You want to not be arrogant. You want to keep an open mind. We talked about that before. Even though you may know the challenges that they face because you've dealt with their industry a million times, you still want to go in with an open mind and listen to them because sometimes there are differences. Sometimes there's unexpected stuff. Now, the next step for improving your listening skills, and this is one I should never have to say, except when I ride with salespeople in the field, I see it happening over and over and over, and I'm just constantly stunned, so I'm going to say it anyways. Never, ever, never interrupt the prospect when they're speaking. Whether they're making a statement or answering your question, no matter what, you never, ever interrupt them. First of all, it's just plain rude, and people aren't going to buy from you if you're being rude to them. But more importantly, if you interrupt them, what you may be interrupting is the thing that they're about to tell you, which is going to be exactly what you needed to know in order to close the deal. So by interrupting them, you may actually screw yourself, not just by insulting them, which of course you're doing, but also by missing out on what they're saying. So never, never interrupt. In order to be a better listener, you also want to make sure that you finish listening before you speak. Now here's what I mean by that. Salespeople often want to be quick on their feet. They want to prove that they have all the answers. So as soon as the other person finishes talking, they jump in. I like to take a couple of moments, and I call it a 3 count. So they're speaking, I'm listening, they're done talking, and I kind of go 1, 2, 3, and then I speak. This has become more and more useful with Jackie, my ex, because she constantly accuses me of not letting her finish. Now, I think she's finished talking, because I know this is a thing for her, so I wait, but if I don't wait long enough, I don't realize she's still got more to say. Now, most prospects aren't like my ex-wife, but what I want you to do is finish listening, take a 1 or 2 or 3 count, and then talk. You don't have to be that quick. Also, you want to keep an open and attentive body posture or body language. You know, if you've studied body language at all, and I suggest that you should if you haven't, we all know what it means when somebody crosses their arms if you say something. Now, it could mean that they're cold and they'll be warmer if they cross their arms. It could just mean that they're more comfortable with their arms crossed, but typically in reading body language, if you make a statement about a feature or a benefit and somebody crosses their arms, it typically means they're shutting down, they're closed off. Well, when I say keep an open and attentive body posture in order to be a better listener, if your arms are crossed, what message are you giving to them? So you want to keep an open and attentive body posture, which means typically your feet are flat on the floor. They're not crossed. Your arms are also in an open posture rather than crossed over you. Typically you're leaning just very slightly forward because you want them to do that too. So you want to keep an open and attentive body posture in order to be a better listener. And you want to ask lots of questions to be a better listener. You want to ask checking questions. And checking questions are questions which confirm your thoughts and prove that you understand. Like if you've noticed, I've asked you several times today and in each session, is that tracking for you? Is that making sense? Am I being clear? And the reason I want to do that is because everything makes sense to me as it's coming out of my mouth. But that doesn't matter here. It could make the most brilliant sense to me in the world, but unless you, my customer in this case, understand it, the information is useless. So I'm constantly checking to make sure that I'm giving you information that's actually useful and you're actually hearing it. So checking questions are questions you ask your prospects to confirm that what you think you heard is what you actually heard. And then the higher level questions, that's asking the same question several times in different ways to make sure that you get closer to the truth. So those are some tips for being a better listener. Does that make sense for you, Jeff?
It does now that you just asked me that checking question.
Ah, good. So you want to be you're being a better listener so that you make sure that the questions you're asking are actually useful, because if you're asking useful questions and you're not listening to the answers, then it's useless. Now, from there we go on to step 3 of the conversational sales skill, which is confirmation. This, my friend, is the easiest part of the sales process. And this is the one that I find almost all salespeople skip. Now, the confirmation process, which is also known as the verification process, is simply getting the answers to all your questions and feeding that information back to your prospect to confirm that what you think you heard is what they really said and what they really meant. And it's very simple to do. So if you were my prospect, Jeff, and I asked you a bunch of questions, and I listened effectively, before it's time to make my presentation or present my proposal to you, I'm going to say something that sounds like this. So, Jeff, if I heard you correctly, what you said was, and then I'm going to paraphrase what you told me. So if we had an hour meeting, I'm going to paraphrase everything I heard in that hour meeting. Now, I'm not going to feed it back to you word for word because that would take another hour, but I'm going to just kind of sum up exactly what you said to me to make sure that we're on the same page. And I may say it like that. So just to make sure we're on the same page, or just to make sure I was listening right, or just to make sure that I heard you correctly, what I think you said was blah, 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 blah. You've got 15 salespeople, and they're pretty good at getting appointments, but they can't get their voicemails returned, and they're pretty good at, once they get in, establishing rapport, but they're not getting good information, and blah, 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 blah. And after you fed everything back to them, you simply say, is that about right? Or are we on the same page? Or did I hear you correctly? Something like that, to which they have to answer. So you're summing up everything you think they've said to you, and then you're saying, is that about right? Now, the beauty of this is that either way, whether they confirm that you're right or you're not right, either way, you're going to get good information. And here's why. If you and I are on a sales call, or you're my prospect, and we're meeting in your office, and I feed everything back to you, and I say, hey, Jeff, did I hear you correctly? You're either going to say this. First thing you might say is, wow, Jeff, you must be the greatest salesperson that ever lived. You know why? Because you listened to every word I said, and you got it completely. Well, they just confirmed that what I think I heard is what I actually heard. And what I think I heard is what they actually said and what they actually meant. In which case, if what I heard was what they said, and if I heard was what they meant, then I'm going to put together a proposal that's going to make sense, right? Because it's based on good information. Does that sound right to you? Good. Good. So the other option is I feed everything back to you. I say, hey, Jeff, is that about right? And you say, no, that's not right, Jeff. In fact, I'm a little curious about something. When you were outside in your car before you came into my building, you know, and you were probably picking the corn out of your teeth to make sure that you don't look foolish when you smile at me, and you're probably going through your briefcase and making sure all your sales materials were all. When you were doing that, I'm curious, did you like take a couple of hits on the vodka bottle or maybe the crack pipe or something like that? Because you must be high. Clearly you didn't listen to a word I said. What I said was, and then they will correct you. They will, if you tell them something that's wrong, they will correct you and give you the right information. So if we were in a sales meeting and you told me that you had 20 salespeople, and when it came time to confirm, and I said, so Jeff, you told me you had 17 salespeople, right? What would you say?
I'd say wrong if I didn't, but right.
Right, you'd probably say, no, I told you I have 20. Because
Right.
it's human nature. See, it's human nature, Jeff. If I say something and I'm wrong, and you correct me, I'm wrong, so you're what?
I'm right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm wrong, so you're right. And you love being right, don't you?
Yeah, yes, of course. My
Yeah, me
ex-wife
too.
loved me before. Yeah. My ex-wife
Yeah,
loved
we
me
all-
before, but you know, I'm good with it.
Yeah, we all love being right. So do our prospects. So when we say something that's wrong to them and ask them if that was right, typically what they'll do is correct us. Steve Schiffman, my ex-boss, calls that getting righted. And it's beautiful because so you fed back the information, and either you're confirmed, you get confirmed that the information you think you heard is correct, or they correct you. Either way, you now have the information you need to make a presentation or a proposal that's going to make sense to them because it's based on good information. You with me?
I'm with you.
Beautiful. Okay. Got about 20 minutes left. Okay, good. So that takes us up to step number 4 in the
Just
conversational.
so you know, wait a second, where are we? Yes, we're at 4:43. We do. I'm sorry, I misunderstood the time. I thought
Yeah, are you good till 5 o'clock, or do you have to get off?
No, it's okay.
Good, okay. So we'll go to about another 15 minutes or so. Do you have any sales situations that you want to work on?
Not right now, no. I mean, again, what I'm doing, I'm driving out. I'm trying to drive more business out there with these guys. I'm on certain appointments. There may be a situation coming up that I'd love to ask you about.
Okay.
But
So let's just then we'll just stick with this. So the 4th step is your presentation, your proposal, your plan. At some point, it is time to say, here's what we've got for you. So I'm going to say there's at least 3 things that absolutely positively must be in your presentation. The first 2, I think we've already talked about, features and benefits. We've talked about the difference, right?
Yes.
Okay. Features are what something is or has, and benefits are what it does. People buy what things do. And I think I gave you the example of a car and tires and steering wheel. Yes? Did I do that with you?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Got it. Okay, good. So I don't want to beat that into a pulp. So obviously, in your presentation, you're going to say, great, so here's my assessment of your situation, and here's how we're going to help it. We've got this kind of phone, which is going to do that for you. And we've got that kind of service plan, which is going to do this for you, and blah, 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 blah. You're going to talk about all about the features of what you have to offer and all the benefits, remembering that it's crucial to tie every feature to a benefit. Salespeople often make the mistake of just going over the features and believing that the prospect is going to make the leap from the feature to the benefit on their own. Well, it's possible they'll do that, but what if they don't? Even when it seems completely obvious, I still make the leap from the feature to the benefit for them by saying something like, and here's what that means to you, and here's what that'll do for you, and here's how that'll help you, and here's what that does for you. I tie every feature to a benefit, because if I don't, and they don't see the benefit, typically they will not say, why would I care about that? Now, some prospects will do that, but most won't, because they don't want to seem like they don't understand. Or they're only half listening, which is even worse. But either way, if they don't see the benefit of the features you're talking about, they're not going to care about them. So 4G, so what? What does that do for me? I don't care that you got the biggest 4G network in the country unless that means something to me. Oh, it means my calls are not going to get dropped as much? Great. It means that I'm going to get my data faster? Great. And I'm going to be more productive? Terrific. And I'm going to make more money? Excellent. All those things are important to me, and if you don't say them, I may make the leap from the features to the benefit, but I may not. So we always want to make sure that we make it easy for the prospect to understand, because if they don't understand, we're making it difficult for them to say yes to us. And obviously we want them to say yes. So I want to make it very easy for them to do that by completely understanding the value of what I'm bringing to the table for them. The other thing that's... Go ahead.
You're giving me flashbacks of the training I had at ADP. Did you ever hear about their sales training?
No.
They have a phenomenal, I mean, I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but and this may be a lead, I don't know if it's a lead for you or not, but ADP had an incredible boot camp of sales training that they put people away for about a month in Atlanta, Georgia, in that area. And they just went over basic sales skills for what they sell, essentially, and then selling in general, the science of selling. And one of the things that they talked about with the features and the benefits is you always ask yourself after you discuss this, so what? And that's what you said to me. So that's why it reminds me of it. So if you can stop somebody from saying, so what, you've covered it.
Fantastic. Oh, my God, that's so funny, because I almost always at some point will write the words, so what, on a huge sheet of paper and put it up on the wall and go, if you can't answer that, then what you're saying is useless to the prospect. That's great. I'd love to do more business with ADP. I got brought in by one of the offices out in Melville to do some cold calling training with them. And unfortunately, it didn't go well because, see, the thing about training is training without reinforcement does no good whatsoever.
I was going to take a guess. They stopped calling after you showed them how to do it.
Well, it's when I met with the guy, and if you need to know his name, D'Onofrio.
I know Joe D'Onofrio. I know Joe D'Onofrio.
Yeah, Joe D'Onofrio. Joe, that's his name.
Yeah.
Had this great meeting. What a good guy. You know, a little bit cocky, but really seemed to know his stuff. We got along great. He's interested, and I tell him, just like I tell every prospect, that if you hire me to come on and teach your people to cold call, you're wasting your time if you don't bring me in to reinforce it, or if your managers don't reinforce it. And he said, well, I don't want to spend the money on the reinforcement, but if you can teach my managers how to do it, I'll make sure they do. So, of course, I took the time to train his management team how to reinforce what I was teaching them, what I was going to be teaching their teams. So I come in, I do a day of cold calling training with them, just like the day that, you saw me and Susan. Well, it was my stuff, not Susan's stuff, but, a whole day of cold calling training. The next morning I come back, we get them on the phones, and they're making live cold calls, just like we did at your offices. So I'm walking around coaching people on the spot. They're making appointments like crazy. They're getting voicemails returned. They're more excited than any salesperson should be because they're actually getting appointments, whereas typically they struggle with it. They're excited beyond belief. I meet with the management team afterwards with Joe. Joe, how do you think this went? Wow, this is a great day. I can't believe it. Okay, you got to realize now, you've got to reinforce this. If you do not, it's not going to stick because your people will go back to what they're comfortable with. Don't worry, Jeff, we understand. We're going to do everything you told me. A couple of months go by, I call Joe and say, hey, Joe, I'd really appreciate it if you could give me some, referrals throughout your company because you're just one tiny office. You got offices all across the country. He goes, you know what, Jeff, I really am not comfortable doing that. And I said, really? Why not? He goes, because it didn't work. I said, I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean. What do you mean it didn't work? I mean, we did the training. The next day you told me they got more appointments than they ever did before. He goes, yeah, but it didn't stick. So that was my experience with ADP. Joe, as nice a guy as he is, didn't do what he said he was going to do, or his managers didn't do what they said they were going to do. And, of course, I caught the blame because my training didn't work because it didn't stick, even though I said the reinforcement piece is crucial.
I'll give you my feedback on that when the recording button is turned off, but let's continue in the meantime.
Yeah, and I would love to do business with ADP. I mean, that would be great, but any company I do business with, when it's my deal, I either build in substantial reinforcement into the deal, or I let them know up front that it's not going to work if you don't reinforce it, and I'm not going to take the blame. And, you know, most companies I do a lot more consulting these days than I do training. Training is always part of a consulting engagement, but it kind of builds in the reinforcement so that a company has a better return on their investment and a much greater likelihood of success. So where we were going with this is the third piece is a verbal proof story. So in every presentation, you've got to talk about the features of what you're going to offer, the benefits of what you're going to offer, and you have to tell a verbal proof story. And a verbal proof story is a story about somebody else, like the prospect, who by doing business with us lived happily ever after. Somebody else, like them, who by doing business with us lived happily ever after. So you're sitting in front of some construction working company. You're sitting in the president of a construction company, and you're talking about the features of what you're going to offer them and the benefits that they're going to get, and they're all excited. But you're also going to tell them a story about some other construction company that you worked with who, by using Verizon Wireless, lived happily ever after. Now, here's why you want to tell a story like that. Because if you remember, when we started out, I told you that great salespeople are always three things. They're the best question askers, the best listeners, and the best storytellers.
Exactly.
Great. So the reason you have to be a good storyteller is because you have to tell verbal proof stories. And the reason you're going to tell a story like that is because if I just come in, if you're my prospect, and I just come in and I say, hey, Jeff, here's why you should use Jeff Goldberg and Associates. Not just because we both have the same first name. That's besides the point. It's because we're going to do blah, 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 and here's how great we are, and here's all the things we do, and all the companies we've worked with, and blah, 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 blah. Well, you're listening to that story about me and about all the things I'm saying. You're listening to all that stuff through a filter. And the filter you're listening through is this. Yeah, I understand what Jeff's saying, and Jeff's a salesman. And what that means is Jeff's a lawyer, and Jeff's a thief, and Jeff's a cheat. And Jeff will do anything he needs to do in order to reach his slimy hand into my pocket and pull out those pieces of green paper with pictures of dead presidents on them and put them into his pocket. Because Jeff's a salesperson, and that's what they do. Yeah, you're laughing, but that's the way most people think of us. Most people think of salespeople as all our salespeople. And I apologize if there's anybody in your family who sells used cars or if you ever sold used cars on the side. But we both know that they're scum of the earth.
That's great.
And that there are many salespeople out there that are willing to lie or cheat or steal or be con artists, and they give everybody a bad name. Everybody in sales a bad name. So even, you know, even guys who deal honestly, and I'm assuming you do and I know I do, they're all, the people that we're trying to sell are still listening to everything we say through, oh yeah, but Jeff's a used car salesman. So in the best of all possible worlds, you and I would have one of our happy customers sitting there with us on the sales call and saying, hey, let me tell you something. You really should use Jeff because I have a company just like yours, and by using Jeff, we did blah, 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 and lived happily ever after. Well, that would be in the best of all possible worlds, but for most of us, it's not likely that we're going to be able to take a real customer with us to a prospect meeting and have them endorse us. The second best thing, or the second thing that would help us the most is telling the story ourselves. So in other words, when I'm on a sales call to Verizon Wireless, I'm going to talk to you about another telecommunications company that I worked with who, by using me, got more appointments, had a shorter sales cycle, closed more business, made more money, had a better ROI, blah, 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 blah. And the reason that that works well is because while it's not as good as the other person sitting there endorsing us, it's second best. Now here's the warning. If your verbal proof story sounds like this, well, they bought a bunch of cell phones from us and a bunch of service, and it never worked. In fact, it worked so badly that they sued us, and we lost in court. Well, that's not a good verbal proof story to tell them. The verbal proof story always has to be about somebody who's fairly similar to them, where things did work out well. Now, the beauty of working with a company like yours is you sell into lots of different verticals, so you should have a verbal proof story for every one of the verticals you sell into. And again, with a company like yours, which is monstrously huge, you should have a ton of success stories. Now, the people that you are working with, because I know you're in the field trying to help other people do this job, you know, some of them are going to be more experienced and some less experienced. When you're new to the company, you probably don't have verbal proof stories that you can tell. But they don't have to be your story. They just have to be Verizon's story.
Right.
So somebody who just comes on board should be handed a list of stories that they can tell, or they should certainly be going to the more tenured salespeople and finding out what success stories. In fact, I think that's a great thing to share at sales meetings, success stories. And when I worked for Steve Schiffman at DEI, we had an intranet access, and we had the success stories broken down by industry or by vertical, so that if I'm going to see a bank, I can go in and look at all the success stories we've had with banks and have these great stories to tell. So the third component, I'm sorry?
I love it.
Yeah, it's great. And if I was you, I'd certainly share that with my team. So you want to talk about the features in your proposal?
Jeff, I do it for the cold calls specifically. I get on there and I do, I'll have them write down in a specific location who next door uses us, or at least in the vicinity, and then who else in the industry. So this way they can use it. It's not necessarily a success story. It is and it isn't. When they're talking on the phone, they make that reference trying to book the appointment.
Yeah, and it's the same thing in person when you're actually selling. A success story makes you more believable, rather than you just saying, here's why you should use Jeff Goldberg and Associates, talking about some other company that used Jeff Goldberg and Associates, and increased sales is more believable than Jeff himself, me, telling you why you should use me. So those are the three components of any presentation: features, benefits, verbal proof story. And I think with 4.5 minutes to go, I'm going to stop here, because the next step that we'll talk about is negotiating, and that's more than a 4-minute conversation, although it's not an hour. I don't want to cut that short. Are there any questions or anything that you have that you'd like to cover right now?
No, I'm good. Just as long as I can have a link back into this. These keep getting better, Jeff. You're scaring me.
Ah, great, man. I'm very glad to hear that. The only other thing that we do need to do is schedule that next session, because it was supposed to be for tomorrow, but I think you already told me that tomorrow is no good, and I actually don't think it's a good idea to do them 2 days back-to-back. I'd like to give you some time to have this sink in before we do the next one. So what's going to work for you for the next session?
Hold on. Goes to show you I'm actively listening, because now I'm logging back into my computer, which I don't have up in front of me when we work here. You got to see, I take everything on an iPad. I have it all done on. It gets emailed to me on PDFs. It's pretty cool. All the notes I take. Use a great note-taking app.
I love it.
Give me a sec. Calendar. Okay. I have next week. No, we're trying to stay 2 weeks, right?
If you want to do next week, that should be fine. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it 2 days back-to-back, but I think next week's okay if you.
No, it's no good. I was thinking out loud. It looks as if Wednesday, the 19th would work, or even Wednesday the 19th, or maybe even Monday the 17th. Is that okay, or do you want to stick to the Wednesday schedule?
No, again, because it's just you and me, Monday the 17th is fine. I'm tied up from about 8 till noon. You want to do it sometime in the afternoon?
Yeah, that would be great. What, like 2 o'clock?
2 o'clock it is, my friend. Yeah, that should be fine, 2 o'clock.
Beautiful.
2 o'clock, and that'll be session 5. All right, my friend. I will make sure that I get this onto a link for you, and I'll send it to you within the next day or two, so you can review it anytime you need to. In the meantime, if you have any questions at all between now and what do we say, what date?
17th.
The 17th at 2 o'clock. Just call me or email me. I'm happy to help.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
All right, Jeff. Have a great one.
See you later.
Bye now.